Marcus Webb had been cleaning the spillways and maintenance corridors of orbital station Kepler-7 for 15 long years. Every single day, he mopped floors, scrubbed walls, and fixed broken pipes in the parts of the station that nobody else wanted to see. The diplomats in their fancy suits walked right past him. The alien merchants with their exotic goods never gave him a second glance. To them, Marcus was just another janitor, invisible, forgettable, just part of the background noise of station life. But Marcus didn't mind much. He had his routines, his favorite cleaning spots, and his quiet corners where he could eat lunch in peace. The lower docking bays were his territory during the night shift, and he knew every inch of those metal corridors better than anyone else on the station. It was supposed to be just another boring Tuesday night shift when everything changed. Marcus was hauling his cleaning cart through Docking Bay 7, humming an old Earth song to pass the time. The bay was mostly empty at this hour, just a few cargo ships sitting silent in their berths. The overhead lights flickered occasionally, something he'd been meaning to report to maintenance for weeks now. His footsteps echoed on the metal grating as he made his way toward the waste disposal units near the back of the bay. That's when he heard it. A wet, rasping sound. Like someone trying to breathe through water. Marcus stopped, his hand freezing on the cart handle. At first, he thought maybe it was just the station's ventilation system acting up again. But then he heard it again, definitely not a machine. It sounded like something alive, something in pain. He followed the sound around a corner, past a stack of cargo containers, until he reached the maintenance hatch that led to the station's lower engineering deck. And there, slumped against the wall like a broken puppet, was an alien. Marcus had seen plenty of aliens during his 15 years on Kepler-7. The station was a major hub for interstellar trade, so he'd mopped up after Centaurians, scrubbed toilets used by Andromedans, and even once cleaned up a mess left by a traveling circus of zero-gravity performers from the Horsehead Nebula. But this alien was a Veskari, and Marcus recognized the species immediately from the educational videos the station made all employees watch. The Veskari was about his height, covered in scales that normally would have been a beautiful deep blue color. But right now, those scales were flashing with rapidly changing patterns of light. What Marcus remembered from the training videos were called bioluminescent distress signals. The alien was trying to call for help with its own body, like a living emergency beacon. But what really got Marcus's attention was the blood. So much blood. Violet-colored blood, thick and gleaming under the flickering lights, was pooling on the floor beneath the alien. The Veskari had a massive wound in its side, just below what Marcus assumed were its ribs. It looked like a stab wound, clean and deep. Someone had attacked this creature and left it here to die. Marcus's first instinct was to call security. He reached for his comlink, but his hand stopped halfway. He knew how station protocol worked. Security was dealing with some kind of disturbance up in the diplomatic sector. He'd heard the chatter on the open channels earlier. They were at least 40 minutes away, probably more. He looked at the alien again. Its breathing was getting shallower. The light patterns on its scales were slowing down, fading. Marcus didn't need to be a doctor to know what that meant. This creature had maybe 10 minutes left, probably less. For a long moment, Marcus just stood there, frozen by indecision. This wasn't his job. He was a janitor, not a medic. He could get in serious trouble for interfering with an alien medical situation. Station regulations were very clear about that. But as he watched the light fading from the Veskari scales, he realized something simple. Regulations didn't matter if this creature died while he stood there doing nothing. Marcus dropped to his knees beside the alien, his work pants soaking up the violet blood. His mind raced through everything he'd learned from the mandatory safety training and those boring educational videos. There was something about human biology being compatible with certain alien species. Something about blood. Then he remembered. It was from a documentary he'd watched a few years back during a slow night shift. Human blood had some kind of universal properties. Something about Earth's evolutionary history and iron-based oxygen carriers made human blood work as an emergency transfusion for about a dozen different species. The documentary had called it the Terran advantage, one of the few biological traits that made humans useful in the galactic community. And Veskari were on that list. Marcus was almost certain of it. His hands were already moving before his brain fully caught up with the decision. He pulled off his work shirt and pressed it hard against the alien's wound. The Veskari made a weak sound, something between a groan and a hiss, but didn't fight him. Maybe it was too far gone to care, or maybe it understood he was trying to help. Marcus grabbed his emergency medkit from his cleaning cart. Every station employee was required to carry one. Usually they were just for treating minor cuts and burns, but Marcus kept his well stocked. He pulled out the portable 4-line, the kind designed for emergency fluid replacement. His hands shook as he set it up. This was insane. He was about to give a blood transfusion to an alien in a dirty docking bay using equipment meant for treating scraped knees. Every safety regulation in the book was screaming at him to stop. But the alternative was watching this creature die on his watch, and Marcus Webb had never been good at walking away from things that needed fixing. He tied the rubber tourniquet around his own arm, found a vein, and slid the needle in with practiced ease. Then he connected the other end to the Veskari's arm, finding what he hoped was a major blood vessel beneath the scales. The alien's skin was cool to the touch, almost cold. That couldn't be a good sign. Marcus squeezed his fist, watching his blood flow through the clear tube. Dark red human blood, traveling toward violet alien blood. For a terrible moment, he wondered if he'd just made a fatal mistake. What if he'd remembered wrong? What if human blood was toxic to Veskari? What if he was about to kill this creature instead of saving it? But then something happened that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. The Veskari scales began to glow. Not with the frantic, desperate patterns from before, this was different. This was golden light, warm and bright, spreading from where Marcus's blood entered its body. The light moved across the alien's scales like fire racing across paper, creating patterns that were almost hypnotic. The Veskari recovered faster than anyone thought possible. The station's medical team was completely baffled. When they brought the alien in on a stretcher, the doctors had given it maybe a 5% chance of survival. The wound had been deep, the blood loss catastrophic. By all accounts, the creature should have been dead long before the ambulance pod even arrived at the docking bay. But within just 3 hours, the Veskari was sitting up in the medical bay, looking around with clear, alert eyes. The doctors ran scan after scan, unable to believe what they were seeing. The massive stab wound had closed itself, leaving behind only a faint silver scar. The alien's vital signs were not just stable, they were perfect, better than perfect actually. The medical staff kept muttering about impossible recovery rates and cellular regeneration that defied every known law of biology. By hour 5, the Veskari was standing. By hour 7, it was arguing with the doctors, insisting it needed to leave. The head physician, a stern woman from Mars Colony, put her foot down and said absolutely not. The alien needed at least 48 hours of observation, maybe more. There were procedures to follow, forms to fill out, insurance protocols to navigate. The Veskari checked itself out anyway. It simply walked out of the medical bay at hour 9, leaving behind a bemused security guard and a very angry doctor. The only thing it left was a name logged in the station's records, Kevin. Just Kevin. No family designation, no clan identifier, no homeworld listing. Just a single human-sounding name that made the administrative staff scratch their heads in confusion. Marcus heard about all of this through the station gossip network. Janitors heard everything, people talked freely around them, as if they were just furniture. He learned that the Veskari had survived, that it had made a miraculous recovery, and that it had vanished somewhere into the station's vast network of corridors and living quarters. Part of him felt relieved. He'd saved a life. That was good. That was enough. He tried to go back to his normal routine. Woke up at the same time, ate the same breakfast of recycled protein paste and station coffee, grabbed his cleaning cart, and headed out for another shift. Everything should have been exactly the same as it had been for the past 15 years. But nothing was the same. Nothing at all. The first strange thing Marcus noticed was the lights. Not the station's lights, something else. He was cleaning a corridor in Section D when he saw it, patterns of energy flowing through the walls themselves. Thin lines of blue and green light, pulsing gently, following paths that matched the station's power conduits. He could see the electricity moving through the cables hidden behind the metal panels, could trace the flow of energy from the generators to every light fixture and computer terminal. Marcus stopped and stared, his mop dripping soapy water onto the floor. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, even slapped himself lightly on the cheek. But the lights didn't go away. They were there, real and visible, like someone had given him X-ray vision tuned specifically to electrical systems. Then came the auras. That's what Marcus started calling them, anyway. He'd be walking through the market district or the residential areas, and he'd see these subtle glows around the aliens passing by. Each species had a different color, a different pattern. The Centaurians had sharp, geometric auras that pulsed in steady rhythms. The Andromedans glowed with soft, swirling patterns that reminded him of oil on water. Even the humans had them, faint reddish hazes that flickered with their emotions. It was like suddenly being able to see a whole new layer of reality that had always been there, hidden just beneath the surface of normal vision. The third thing was the glyphs. Marcus first noticed them in the bathroom mirror of his small apartment. He was brushing his teeth, same as always, when symbols started appearing in the reflection. They weren't on the mirror itself, he checked, running his fingers over the glass. They were in the reflection only, floating like ghostly writing. The symbols looked ancient, alien, nothing like any language he'd ever seen. They shifted and changed, forming new patterns, as if they were trying to tell him something he couldn't quite understand. But nothing was the same. Nothing at all. The first strange thing Marcus noticed was the lights. Not the station's lights, something else. He was cleaning a corridor in Section D when he saw it, patterns of energy flowing through the walls themselves. Thin lines of blue and green light, pulsing gently, following paths that matched the station's power conduits. He could see the electricity moving through the cables hidden behind the metal panels, could trace the flow of energy from the generators to every light fixture and computer terminal. Marcus stopped and stared, his mop dripping soapy water onto the floor. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, even slapped himself lightly on the cheek. But the lights didn't go away. They were there, real and visible, like someone had given him X-ray vision tuned specifically to electrical systems. Then came the auras. That's what Marcus started calling them, anyway. He'd be walking through the market district or the residential areas, and he'd see these subtle glows around the aliens passing by. Each species had a different color, a different pattern. The Centaurians had sharp, geometric auras that pulsed in steady rhythms. The Andromedans glowed with soft, swirling patterns that reminded him of oil on water. Even the humans had them, faint reddish hazes that flickered with their emotions. It was like suddenly being able to see a whole new layer of reality that had always been there, hidden just beneath the surface of normal vision. The third thing was the glyphs. Marcus first noticed them in the bathroom mirror of his small apartment. He was brushing his teeth, same as always, when symbols started appearing in the reflection. They weren't on the mirror itself, he checked, running his fingers over the glass. They were in the reflection only, floating like ghostly writing. The symbols looked ancient, alien, nothing like any language he'd ever seen. They shifted and changed, forming new patterns, as if they were trying to tell him something he couldn't quite understand. The glyphs showed up everywhere after that. In windows, in puddles of water, in the polished metal surfaces of the station walls. Always in reflections, never in the real world. Marcus started avoiding mirrors when he could. The constant stream of incomprehensible alien writing was giving him headaches. He didn't tell anyone. What would he say? That he was seeing things? They'd pull him off duty, send him to the psychiatric ward, run a bunch of tests. He'd lose his job, his apartment, everything. So Marcus kept quiet and tried to adapt to his new, strange reality. 3 days after the incident in the docking bay, Marcus was working in the waste reclamation sector. It was one of the worst jobs on the station, the place where all the garbage and sewage got processed and recycled. The smell was horrible, even through his mask. Most janitors avoided this sector if they could, but Marcus had volunteered for the shift. Fewer people meant fewer questions about why he kept staring at walls and flinching at lights only he could see. He was elbow deep in a malfunctioning trash compactor, trying to clear a jam, when he felt it. A presence. Someone watching him. The feeling was so strong, so intense, that Marcus actually gasped and pulled his arm out of the machine, spinning around. The Veskari stood about 20 feet away, perfectly still in the shadows between two processing units. But it wasn't the same creature Marcus had saved. Oh, it looked similar, same blue scales, same basic body shape. But everything else was different. The way it stood radiated power and confidence. Its movements were fluid, controlled, like a predator that knew exactly how dangerous it was. Even its eyes had changed. They glowed with a faint golden light that hadn't been there before. Marcus noticed something else too. The station security personnel, the tough veterans who kept order in this chaotic place, were giving the Veskari a wide berth. They saw it coming and actually stepped aside, their hands moving unconsciously toward their weapons before thinking better of it. Whatever this creature had become, it made trained soldiers nervous. The Veskari walked toward Marcus with that same predatory grace. Each step was precise, balanced, like it was moving through a combat drill. When it got close enough, Marcus could see the golden pattern still visible beneath its scales, pulsing faintly with each breath. "Hello, Marcus Webb," the alien said. Its voice was different too, deeper, resonant, like multiple voices speaking in harmony. "I believe we need to talk about what you have done." Marcus swallowed hard. His throat suddenly felt very dry. I just gave you some blood. You were dying. I couldn't just leave you there." The Veskari's expression was impossible to read, but something that might have been amusement flickered across its features. You do not understand. Your blood has done far more than save a life. It has awakened something that was meant to sleep forever. It has called forth the Dragon King of the Ninth Spiral from his ancient slumber. And in doing so, it has bound us together in ways that neither of us can fully understand or escape. Marcus stared at the alien, his mind struggling to process the words. Dragon King? Ninth Spiral? Bound together? None of this made any sense. My name is Kevin, the Veskari continued, though that is merely the name I have worn in this life of hiding. My true name is much older, much longer, and in your language would break your tongue to speak it. What you need to understand, Marcus Webb, is that your simple act of mercy has changed everything. For both of us. And for this galaxy. The attack came during Gamma Shift, when the station was at its quietest. Most of the population was asleep, and only skeleton crews kept the essential systems running. Marcus had just started his rounds, pushing his cleaning cart through the empty corridors, when the first explosion hit. The blast was so powerful that it knocked him off his feet. His cart went flying, cleaning supplies scattering across the floor as the entire station shuddered like a wounded animal. Emergency alarms started wailing immediately, their piercing shriek echoing through every corridor. Red warning lights bathed everything in an eerie crimson glow. Marcus scrambled to his feet, his ears ringing from the explosion. Through the nearest window, he could see flames erupting from Docking Bay 3. Before he could even process what was happening, 2 more explosions followed in quick succession. Bays 5 and 7 went up in balls of fire and twisted metal. Someone was attacking the station, and they were doing it with military precision. The comm system crackled to life with panicked voices. Security teams were scrambling, trying to coordinate a response. But there was confusion everywhere. Nobody knew how many attackers there were or where they were coming from. The security chief was shouting orders, but Marcus could hear the fear underneath the authority in his voice. Then Marcus saw them. They came through the smoke like ghosts, moving down the corridor in perfect formation. At first, he could barely see them at all. Their armor seemed to blend with the surroundings, shifting and changing colors to match the walls and floor. It was adaptive camouflage, the kind of high-tech gear that cost more than Marcus would make in 10 lifetimes. There were 6 of them in this squad, all carrying weapons that hummed with deadly energy. They moved with the kind of coordination that only came from years of training together. These weren't pirates or common criminals looking for a quick score. These were professional soldiers, elite killers who knew exactly what they were doing. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, trying to make himself as small as possible. His heart was hammering so hard he was sure they could hear it. The soldiers swept past his position, their weapons raised and ready. One of them paused, turning its head in his direction. For a terrible moment, Marcus thought he'd been spotted. But then the soldier moved on, following its squad deeper into the station. That's when the strange awareness kicked in. It was the same sensation Marcus had been experiencing for the past 3 days, but now it was 1,000 times stronger. He could feel the energy patterns throughout the station, could sense the movement of people and power flowing through the walls. And more than that, he could sense danger, like a burning sensation at the back of his mind that told him exactly where the attackers were and where they were going. They were heading toward the residential sectors. Toward the civilians sleeping in their beds, unaware of what was coming. Marcus didn't think. His body just moved, acting on instincts he didn't know he had. He abandoned his cleaning cart and ran, but not away from the danger. He ran parallel to the attackers, using the maintenance shafts and service corridors he'd cleaned for 15 years. Every shortcut, every hidden passage, every route that the station's official maps didn't show, Marcus knew them all by heart. He burst out of a maintenance hatch ahead of the squad and started pounding on apartment doors, screaming for people to wake up and run. Confused faces appeared, some angry at being woken, others terrified by the alarm still echoing through the station. Marcus didn't stop to explain. He just kept moving, kept warning people, kept trying to save as many lives as he could. That's when Kevin found him. The Veskari appeared out of nowhere, moving with that same predatory grace Marcus had seen in the waste reclamation sector. But now, Kevin wasn't trying to hide what he was anymore. The scales on his body were glowing with golden light, and his eyes burned with an intensity that was almost frightening. "They have come for us," Kevin said simply. "The Sovereign Collective. They know what you awakened, and they will not stop until we are dead or captured." "Who are they?" Marcus gasped, still trying to catch his breath from all the running. "What do they want?" "Explanations will have to wait. Right now, we need to survive." The first squad rounded the corner at that exact moment. They saw Kevin and Marcus standing in the middle of the corridor, and everything happened incredibly fast. The soldiers raised their weapons without hesitation. Plasma bolts erupted from their rifles, streaks of superheated energy that could punch through solid steel. Kevin moved like nothing Marcus had ever seen before. The Veskari was suddenly flowing forward, his body twisting and spinning in ways that seemed to defy physics. The scales on his body shifted and hardened, forming interlocking plates of armor that covered him like a second skin. The plasma bolts hit him and simply bounced off, deflected by scales that had somehow become harder than military-grade armor plating. Kevin's hands blurred, and suddenly he had claws, actual glowing claws made of some kind of golden energy that extended from his fingertips. He tore through the first soldier's weapon like it was made of paper. The second soldier went down as Kevin swept his legs out from under him with a movement too fast to follow. The third soldier managed to fire off another shot, but Kevin caught the plasma bolt somehow, absorbed it into his hand, and threw it back with twice the force. It was like watching a force of nature fight. Kevin moved like liquid fire, every movement precise and devastating. Within seconds, 3 of the 6 soldiers were down, unconscious or disarmed. The other 3 were backing away, their training warring with their survival instincts. But Marcus wasn't watching Kevin anymore. He was watching the soldier who had broken away from the fight and was coming straight at him. The attacker was huge, easily a foot taller than Marcus, and built like a tank. In the soldier's hand was a vibroblade, a weapon that vibrated at frequencies high enough to cut through almost anything. Marcus didn't think about running. There was no time. The soldier lunged, the blade coming straight at his chest in a killing thrust that would have skewered him like a piece of meat. Marcus threw up his hand instinctively, a desperate gesture that couldn't possibly stop a blade moving that fast. But something impossible happened. Light exploded from Marcus's palm. Not just any light, crystalline light, clear and pure and incredibly bright. It formed a barrier in the air between Marcus and the soldier, a wall of solidified energy that appeared in less than a heartbeat. The vibroblade hit the barrier and shattered into 1,000 pieces. The fragments went flying in all directions, embedding themselves in the walls and floor. The soldier stumbled backward, staring at his broken weapon in shock and disbelief. Marcus stared at his own hand, equally shocked. The crystalline barrier was still there, hovering in the air, slowly fading like morning mist. He could feel the energy flowing through him, could sense the power that had created the shield coming from somewhere deep inside his body. Kevin dispatched the last 3 soldiers with brutal efficiency, then turned to look at Marcus. The Veskari's expression was difficult to read, but Marcus thought he saw something like surprise there. Maybe even a hint of fear. "You should not be able to do that," Kevin said quietly. "Not yet. Not this soon. The bonding process takes months, sometimes years. But you are already manifesting abilities that even I do not fully understand." More explosions echoed through the station. The attackers weren't done. This was just the first wave. Marcus could feel more of them coming through his strange new awareness, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, spreading through Kepler-7 like a plague. Kevin grabbed Marcus by the arm. His grip was gentle but firm, and Marcus could feel the heat radiating from the Veskari's scales. "We need to leave. Now. This station is lost. They will tear it apart looking for us, and they will not care how many innocents die in the process." "We can't just abandon these people," Marcus protested, thinking of all the families sleeping in the residential sectors, all the workers and merchants and travelers who had nothing to do with whatever was happening. "If we stay, everyone dies," Kevin said bluntly. "Including us. If we leave, perhaps they will follow. Perhaps we can draw them away and give these people a chance to evacuate. It is the best option we have." The smuggler's ship was a beat-up old cargo hauler called the Vagrant Star, held together by spare parts and what Marcus suspected was pure stubbornness. Its captain was a grizzled human named Cole who asked no questions and demanded payment in advance. Kevin produced a credit chip that made Cole's eyes go wide, and suddenly the captain became very interested in getting them as far from Kepler-7 as possible. Marcus spent the 3-day journey in a cramped passenger cabin, watching through the porthole as they left civilized space behind. They passed through shipping lanes busy with commercial traffic, then into the frontier zones where law enforcement was sparse, and finally into regions where the star charts had more blank spaces than labeled systems. Kevin spent most of the journey in meditation, sitting cross-legged in his cabin with that golden light pulsing beneath his scales. Marcus tried to sleep but found it impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the station burning, heard the screams of people running from the explosions. He'd left behind the only home he'd known for 15 years. Everything he owned, all his small possessions and familiar routines, were gone. On the 3rd day, they entered the haze. It was a nebula cluster unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Vast clouds of gas and dust stretched across space in every direction, glowing with colors that seemed impossible, purples and greens and blues that shifted and swirled like oil on water. The clouds were so thick that visibility dropped to almost nothing. Ships could hide in here and never be found, could disappear completely from any sensor scan. The vagrant star navigated through the clouds using coordinates that Kevin provided. They passed dozens of hidden vessels, pirate ships, refugee transports, military deserters, all the people who had reasons to hide from the galaxy's authorities. Nobody challenged them. Nobody asked their business. In the haze, anonymity was the most valuable currency. Their destination was an asteroid, one of thousands floating through the nebula. But this one had been hollowed out long ago, transformed into a secret base hidden inside solid rock. The entrance was camouflaged so well that Marcus didn't even see it until they were practically on top of it, a hangar bay carved into the asteroid's surface, shielded from detection by layers of interference technology. Inside, the asteroid had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between a fortress and a temple. The walls were covered in carvings that reminded Marcus of the glyphs he'd been seeing in reflections, ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Other Veskari were everywhere, moving through corridors with purpose, all of them stopping to stare as Kevin walked past with a human in tow. Kevin led Marcus deep into the heart of the asteroid, through winding passages and security checkpoints, until they reached a massive chamber carved from the living rock. The room was circular, with a domed ceiling that had been painted to look like a star field. In the center was a round table made of some dark, polished stone, and around that table sat the most intimidating group of aliens Marcus had ever seen. There were 12 of them, all Veskari, all old. Marcus could tell they were ancient just by looking at them. Their scales had a depth of color that came from centuries of life, patterns that seemed to contain entire histories. Some had scars that looked like they'd been earned in battles fought before humans even left Earth. Their eyes held a weight that made Marcus feel like a child standing before teachers who had forgotten more than he would ever know. This was the Shadow Council, the secret leadership of the Veskari people. The beings who remembered what their species had once been, before they chose to hide and forget. Kevin bowed to them with a respect Marcus had never seen him show before. Honored elders, I come before you with news that will shake the foundations of our hidden world. The Sovereign Collective has returned, and they hunt us once more. But more importantly, I bring you the human who awakened me. Marcus Webb, the janitor who gave his blood to save my life, and in doing so, has become something unprecedented in our long history. The elders studied Marcus with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. One of them, a female Veskari whose scales were so dark they were almost black, leaned forward with eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. A human, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. You bring a primitive species to our most sacred sanctuary, Kevin. You reveal our existence to a being whose people still fight among themselves over scraps of territory and resources. Have you lost your mind along with your common sense? With respect, Elder Rita, this human is far from primitive, Kevin replied calmly. He carries something in his blood that should not exist. Something that unlocked my sealed heritage with a simple transfusion. He manifests abilities that take our kind decades to master, and he does so within days. Look at him with your true sight, and tell me what you see. Rita's eyes narrowed, and suddenly Marcus felt like he was being examined by a scanner far more powerful than any medical equipment. The other elders did the same, their attention focusing on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. He stood there, feeling completely exposed, while these ancient beings studied him like he was a specimen in a laboratory. One of the elders gasped. Another made a sound like a hiss. Rita's expression shifted from contempt to something that looked like fear. Impossible, she whispered. Human blood should not be compatible with our genetic keys. We made certain of that when we sealed ourselves. We locked our heritage behind codes that only pure Veskari DNA could access. This primitive species should have no connection to our ancient bloodlines whatsoever. And yet here he stands, Kevin said quietly. Bonded to me in ways that go deeper than any ritual binding. Capable of manifesting powers that even I struggle to control. Tell me, elders, how is this possible? An older male Veskari, his scales marked with complex patterns that suggested high rank, spoke in a voice that sounded like distant thunder. The progenitors. The ancient ones who seeded life across this galaxy. They vanished 2 million years ago, disappeared without explanation or trace. We always assumed they died out, that their civilization collapsed or they transcended to some higher plane of existence. But what if we were wrong? What if they didn't vanish? another elder continued the thought. What if they scattered themselves? Broke their essence into fragments and planted those fragments in the genetic codes of primitive species throughout the galaxy? Species that would one day evolve, one day reach for the stars, one day perhaps remember what they once were. Rita stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the stone floor. You're suggesting that humans carry progenitor markers in their DNA? That this janitor is somehow a distant descendant of the beings who created the Dragon Kings themselves? That's absurd. That's impossible. That's the only explanation that makes sense, Kevin interrupted. The plan was completely insane, and Marcus knew it. But after 3 days of arguments and debates in the Shadow Council chambers, it was the only option they had left. The Sovereign Collective had captured 3 Veskari carriers, ordinary Veskari who had no idea they carried dormant Dragon Kings sleeping in their genetic code. Intelligence reports from Kevin's network of spies said the Sovereigns were holding them at their primary research station, a massive facility called Oblivion's Gate that orbited a dead star in uncharted space. And according to those same reports, the Sovereigns were close to cracking the code. They were torturing the prisoners, running brutal experiments, trying to force the Dragon Kings to awaken under their control. If they succeeded, if they managed to weaponize even one of those ancient powers, the entire galaxy would burn. The Shadow Council had argued for hours about whether to attempt to rescue. It was a suicide mission. Oblivion's Gate was one of the most heavily defended facilities in known space, protected by layers of shields, weapons platforms, and an army of those elite soldiers Marcus had barely survived fighting on Kepler-7. Attacking it head-on would be impossible. But Marcus had spoken up during the debate, his voice cutting through the arguing elders. He'd told them about his abilities, about the crystalline barrier he'd created without thinking, about how his blood had awakened Kevin in the first place. If those 3 prisoners needed to be awakened safely, before the Sovereigns could corrupt them, then Marcus was the only one who could do it. His blood was the key. Kevin had supported him immediately, and eventually, the Council had agreed. They would mount a rescue operation, but it would be split into 2 parts. Kevin would lead a frontal assault with a team of Veskari warriors, drawing the station's defenses and military forces away from the critical areas. Meanwhile, Marcus would infiltrate the medical bay with a small team and free the prisoners. Rita's daughter Amy had volunteered to go with Marcus. She was younger than the elders, maybe only a century or 2 old, and she moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent years as a special operations agent. Her scales were lighter than Kevin's, almost silver, and she carried weapons that looked like they'd been designed specifically for covert work. The infiltration team consisted of just the 2 of them. Any larger group would be too easy to detect. Amy assured Marcus that 2 skilled operatives could accomplish what an army could not. Marcus didn't mention that he was a janitor with barely a week of combat experience. He figured she probably already knew. They approached Oblivion's Gate in a stolen Sovereign shuttle, using access codes that Kevin's spies had acquired through methods Marcus didn't want to think about too carefully. The station loomed in space like a metal moon, bristling with weapons and sensors. Marcus could see the defensive platforms orbiting it, automated guns that could track and destroy anything that moved without proper authorization. Amy piloted them through the security checkpoints with a calmness that Marcus envied. She transmitted the stolen codes, answered the security challenges with pre-recorded voice patterns, and guided their shuttle into the station's hangar bay like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Within minutes, they were inside, walking through corridors filled with Sovereign soldiers and scientists who had no idea 2 enemies were moving among them. The frontal assault began exactly on schedule. Kevin and his team hit the station's main docking ports with everything they had. Explosions rocked the facility as Veskari warriors tore through the outer defenses. Alarms screamed through every corridor. Soldiers rushed toward the breach points, leaving other areas of the station temporarily understaffed. That was Marcus and Amy's window. They moved quickly through the chaos, following blueprints that Amy had memorized. The medical bay was deep inside the station, in a section designed to be both secure and isolated. They encountered guards twice, but Amy handled them with brutal efficiency before they could raise the alarm. Marcus tried not to look too closely at what she did. He'd seen enough violence lately to last a lifetime. The medical bay doors were locked with biometric security that should have been impossible to bypass. But Amy produced a severed hand from her equipment pack. Marcus felt his stomach turn, and pressed it against the scanner. The doors hissed open, revealing a nightmare. The medical bay looked more like a torture chamber than a place of healing. The 3 Veskari prisoners were suspended in vertical stasis fields, their bodies held upright by energy beams that seemed to pin them in place like insects on display boards. But it was what had been done to them that made Marcus's blood run cold. Their bodies had been cut open. Not surgically, not carefully. These were brutal, invasive procedures that had torn through scales and flesh to expose the prisoners' internal organs. Machines were connected to their bodies, tubes and wires running from their open chests to monitoring equipment that hummed and beeped. The prisoners were still alive, somehow, kept conscious by the stasis fields even as their bodies were being systematically violated. One of them saw Marcus and Amy enter. The prisoner's eyes were wild with pain and desperation, and it tried to speak, but couldn't. Some kind of device had been clamped over its mouth, preventing any sound from escaping. Marcus felt rage flood through him like nothing he'd ever experienced before. It was hot and pure and overwhelming, burning away his fear and hesitation. These were innocent people being tortured for something they didn't even know they carried. They were victims, just like Marcus had almost been a victim on Kepler-7. The only difference was that nobody had been there to help them. Until now. Amy moved to the control panels while Marcus approached the prisoners. She worked quickly, her fingers flying over the alien interface as she tried to figure out how to shut down the stasis fields without killing the prisoners in the process. The machines keeping them alive were also keeping them in agony, and disconnecting them wrong could be fatal. "I need 10 minutes, Amy said tersely. "These systems are more complex than our intel suggested. They've got failsafes built into failsafes. If I rush this, we could lose all 3 of them." "We don't have 10 minutes, Marcus replied, hearing explosions growing closer. Kevin's assault team was pushing deeper into the station, but that also meant the Sovereigns would be pulling back, consolidating their forces. Eventually, someone would remember to check on their precious prisoners. Marcus made a decision. He approached the first prisoner, a male Veskari whose scales were pale blue marbled with white. The prisoner's eyes followed him, pleading silently. Marcus pulled out a small medical kit from his pack, the same kind of emergency kit he'd used to save Kevin, though this one was military grade, provided by the Shadow Council. "I'm going to help you," Marcus said softly, not sure if the prisoner could even hear him through whatever drugs they'd been pumped full of. "This is going to hurt, but I need you to trust me." He found a vein in the prisoner's arm, one of the few places not connected to machines or torn open by experiments. Marcus tied a tourniquet around his own arm, found his own vein, and set up the transfusion line. His hands were steady now, even though his heart was racing. He'd done this before. He could do it again. His blood flowed through the tube, dark red against the clear plastic. The moment it entered the prisoner's body, something incredible happened. Golden light erupted from beneath the Veskari scales, the same light Marcus had seen when he'd saved Kevin. But this time, it was more intense, more violent, like a star going supernova in slow motion. The machines connected to the prisoner's body exploded.